Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast. This is Mano, and I'm absolutely thrilled to have you here with me today. Whether you're tuning in for the very first time or you're a regular listener who keeps coming back, I'm genuinely grateful that you've chosen to spend your time with me. If this is your first visit to our little corner of the podcasting world, I really hope you'll consider hitting that subscribe button so you don't miss out on future episodes where we dive deep into topics that actually matter to your learning journey. And here's the thing, if you find today's conversation helpful or if it resonates with you in any way, please do me a massive favor and share it with a friend, a family member, or anyone you think could benefit from what we're talking about. Sharing really does help us reach more people who are hungry to learn and grow. By the way, if you want to explore more episodes like this one, make sure you check out our podcast playlist where we've collected all the best episodes on language learning, personal growth, and practical skills you can actually use in your daily life. Today's episode is all about something that every single English learner struggles with at some point, and honestly, it's probably one of the most frustrating challenges you'll ever face. We're talking about remembering English words, not just learning them once and forgetting them forever, but actually building a system in your mind that makes words stick around permanently so you can use them confidently in conversations, writing, and real life situations. So grab yourself a cup of coffee, find a comfortable spot, and let's jump right in. This is going to be a game changer for your English learning journey. Let me start by asking you a question that I'm sure many of you can relate to. How many times have you learned a new English word, felt pretty confident about it, and then a few days later, when you actually needed to use it, your mind just went completely blank? It's like the word evaporated into thin air, right? You studied it, you wrote it down, you even looked it up in a dictionary, but when the moment came to actually say it or use it in a sentence, nothing. Just silence. Total blackout. I'm going to guess that if you're listening to this podcast, you've experienced this more than once, maybe even hundreds of times. And here's what I want you to know right from the start. You're not alone in this struggle. Every single English learner, from beginners to advanced speakers, has felt this exact frustration at some point. It's one of those universal challenges that connects all of us who are trying to master a language that isn't our first. But here's the really good news that I'm excited to share with you today. This problem has a solution. And it's not just one solution. There are actually multiple proven techniques and strategies that you can use right now to transform the way you learn and remember English vocabulary. The difference isn't going to be about working harder. It's going to be about working smarter and understanding how your brain actually processes and stores information. Think about it this way. We've all been taught that vocabulary learning is about repetition, right? You learn a word, you write it down 10 times, you repeat it over and over again, and eventually it sticks. But that's actually not how your brain works. Your brain isn't a tape recorder. It's not filing away every piece of information you feed it in the exact same way. Your brain is infinitely more intelligent and sophisticated than that. It's constantly looking for patterns, connections, and meaning. Here's what actually happens inside your head when you learn something new. Your brain is asking itself questions like, is this important? Does this connect to something I already know? Have I seen this before? Is there emotion attached to this? Does this make sense in the context of my life? If your brain can answer yes to most of those questions, the information gets filed away in your long-term memory. If it can't, well, that word just becomes another forgotten item that you'll never access when you need it. This is why so many traditional learning methods fail. They treat vocabulary learning like it's a cold, mechanical process. You learn the word, you memorize the definition, you move on to the next word. There's no connection, there's no emotion, There's no relevance to your actual life. So your brain, being the smart thing it is, figures out that this information isn't actually important and doesn't bother storing it for long-term use. But when you approach vocabulary learning differently, when you make it personal, when you connect it to your life, when you use your imagination to create vivid mental images, when you involve your emotions and your senses, that's when the magic happens. That's when words start sticking around. That's when you find yourself actually remembering vocabulary without even trying, because it's been woven into your memory in a way that feels natural and organic. So before we dive into all the specific techniques and strategies, I want to set you up with the right mindset. Understand that forgetting is actually a normal and natural part of learning. Your brain isn't broken. You're not bad at languages. You're just working with methods that aren't aligned with how your brain actually functions. Once we fix that alignment, everything changes. Now, let's talk about the actual mechanics of how memory works. This is going to sound like psychology class for a moment, but I promise it's relevant and it'll help you understand why the techniques we're going to talk about later are so effective. Understanding the foundation is going to make everything else make sense. Your memory isn't just one thing, it's actually multiple systems working together. There's your immediate short-term memory, which is like your mental notepad where you hold information for just a few seconds or minutes. When someone tells you a phone number and you immediately dial it, you're using short-term memory. But the second you hang up and you're not thinking about it anymore, it's usually gone forever because you didn't transfer it to long-term memory. Then there's long-term memory, which is where you want your vocabulary to live. Long-term memory is where all your permanent knowledge lives. Your childhood memories, facts you learned in school, words you've known for years. The thing about long-term memory is that it has an almost unlimited capacity, but it takes effort and the right conditions to get information from your short-term memory into your long-term memory. The process of moving information from short-term to long-term memory is called consolidation. And one of the biggest factors that determines whether something gets consolidated is something called elaboration. Elaboration basically means creating rich, detailed connections between new information and information you already know. The more elaborate your connections, the stronger the memory. So when you learn a new English word, your goal isn't just to read it once or write it down once. Your goal is to elaborate on it. Think about what it means. Think about where you might use it. Think about what other words it relates to. Create a sentence using it. Imagine a situation where you'd say this word. All of this elaboration is creating multiple pathways in your brain that lead to this word. And the more pathways you have, the easier it is to retrieve the word when you need it. Another critical factor in memory is something called emotional arousal. Your brain prioritizes emotional information. If something makes you feel something, whether it's happy, sad, surprised, angry, or even just interested, your brain tags it as important and stores it more robustly. This is actually an evolutionary thing. Your ancestors needed to remember dangerous or exciting situations so they could avoid danger and repeat positive experiences. That survival mechanism is still hardwired into your brain. So, when you learn vocabulary in a boring, emotionless way, you're working against your brain's natural priorities. But when you learn vocabulary in a way that creates some emotional engagement, even if it's just a little bit of humor or surprise, you're working with your brain. You're telling it, this is important, pay attention. Visual information is also incredibly important to memory. Humans are visual creatures. We process visual information much faster than text or audio, and we remember it much better. That's why infographics are so popular. why movies are more engaging than books for many people, and why if I describe something to you, you can picture it in your mind. Your brain loves visual information. This is why imagination is such a powerful tool for vocabulary learning. When you close your eyes and create a vivid mental image of a word's meaning, you're not just engaging your verbal centers, you're engaging your visual centers, your spatial centers, and your sensory centers all at once. That multimodal engagement creates a much stronger memory. Repetition is still important, but it's not the repetition you're probably thinking of. It's not about writing the same word 100 times. It's about spaced repetition. Your brain forgets things over time. This is actually called the forgetting curve. But if you review something right before you forget it completely, you reset the curve. You give your brain another chance to consolidate the memory. And each time you review it, the memory becomes more permanent and more resistant to forgetting. Alright, so now that we understand how memory works, let's start talking about actual techniques you can use to remember English vocabulary. The first and one of the most powerful techniques is what I call the imagination technique. This is based on the idea that your brain remembers things that are vivid, personal, and emotionally engaging. Here's the basic principle. Instead of just learning a word by reading its definition, you're going to close your eyes and create a mental movie of that word being used in a real situation. And not just any situation, a situation that's relevant to your life. The more unusual or unexpected the mental image, the better, because unusual things stick in your memory more easily than ordinary things. Let me give you a practical example. Let's say you're learning the word umbrella. The boring way to learn this would be to look up the definition, a device for protection from rain. Okay, you know the definition. But are you really going to remember this word a week from now? Probably not. But here's how you do it with the imagination technique. Close your eyes. Picture yourself standing outside on a rainy day. It's raining really hard. The drops are hitting the pavement and bouncing up. It's cold. You can almost feel the moisture in the air. Now picture yourself holding a big, colorful umbrella. Let's say it's blue with yellow stripes, making it nice and vivid. You're holding it over your head, and the rain is bouncing off the top. You can see the water running down the edges and dripping off the sides. You hear the pitter-patter of the rain on the umbrella material. Now say to yourself, I need my umbrella because it's raining and I don't want to get wet. Feel the relief of staying dry. Feel the slight weight of the umbrella in your hand. Open your eyes. Now, which version of learning umbrella is going to stick in your mind? The definition or the vivid sensory experience you just created? Obviously, the vivid experience. And here's the beautiful thing, because you created that image yourself, and because it involved your senses and your imagination, it's now much harder for you to forget. Your brain has filed it away as important information. This technique works because of something called dual coding theory. Basically, when you engage both your visual and verbal channels, when you imagine something while also saying something about it, you create two separate pathways to that memory. So if one pathway gets fuzzy, you still have the other pathway to retrieve the information. Let me give you another example because I want you to really understand how to apply this. Let's say you want to learn the word procrastinate. That's a common English word that means to delay or postpone something. Now you could memorize that definition, or you could create a mental scenario. Imagine yourself, you have a big project due tomorrow. You know you should start working on it right now, but instead you're scrolling through your phone. You tell yourself, I'll start after I finish this video. But then there's another video and another. Before you know it, 2 hours have passed. You're starting to feel that anxiety creeping in because you haven't started yet. Now it's evening. You're still telling yourself you'll start working soon, but you're watching a movie instead. You're procrastinating. You're consciously choosing to delay the task even though you know you should do it. Now close your eyes and really feel that anxiety. Feel the weight of knowing you should be working but choosing not to. Feel the pressure as the deadline gets closer. Say to yourself, I am procrastinating again. I need to stop procrastinating and start my work. That's how the imagination technique works. You're creating a personal, emotional, visual, sensory experience of the word. And because it's so rich and detailed, it becomes something you're not going to forget. Here's something important to remember. The mental images don't have to be realistic. In fact, the more unusual or even silly they are, the better they'll stick. If you wanted to remember the word lazy, you could imagine yourself as a sloth hanging from a tree branch, barely moving, with a smile on your face. That's much more memorable than just reading the definition. You can also combine this with what's called the linking method, where you connect unusual images to create a chain of memory. If you wanted to remember multiple words, let's say table, window, and bird, you could create one continuous mental movie. You're sitting at a table, looking out a window, and a bird flies in through the window and lands on your table. The more connected and continuous your mental story, the more easily you'll remember all the words in sequence. This technique is especially powerful because it leverages your brain's natural ability to remember places and visual scenes. Humans are exceptionally good at remembering where things are and what they look like. We're much worse at remembering abstract information. So when you convert abstract words into vivid visual scenes, you're using your brain's strength against its weakness. Now, we've talked about using imagination, but there's another element that makes memory incredibly strong, and that's personalization. Your brain cares much more about information that's relevant to your life than information that's just abstract or theoretical. Think about it. You probably remember the names of all your friends and family members, even though you might have heard them hundreds of times. That's not because names are easy to remember, they're actually quite difficult. You remember them because they're personal, they matter to you, they're relevant to your life. The same principle applies to vocabulary learning. If you learn a word in a generic context, if you just memorize the definition, it doesn't feel personal. But if you learn a word by creating a sentence or a situation that's relevant to your actual life, it suddenly becomes important to your brain. Let me give you a concrete example. Let's say you're learning the word ambitious. You could study the definition, which might be something like having a strong desire to succeed or achieve goals. But here's how you'd personalize it. Think about your own goals. What are you ambitious about? Maybe you're ambitious about learning English. Maybe you're ambitious about getting a better job. Maybe you're ambitious about becoming a musician or a writer or an athlete. Now create a sentence using ambitious that's about your own situation. I am ambitious because I want to become fluent in English and travel to English speaking countries to practice. Or, my sister is ambitious. She dreams of opening her own business one day and she's willing to work hard to make it happen. Notice the difference? Now, ambitious isn't just a word in a dictionary. It's a word connected to your real life, to your real goals, to your real experiences. Your brain immediately understands why this word is important. It's not just academic, it matters. Here's another powerful way to personalize vocabulary. Use the personal experience technique. Every time you learn a new word, ask yourself, when was the last time I encountered this situation in my real life? Or, when might I use this word in the future? For example, if you're learning the word frustrated, think about a time when you actually felt frustrated. Maybe it was when you were trying to learn English and you kept making mistakes, or when you were playing a game and you lost, or when someone misunderstood you. Now connect that real experience to the word. Say to yourself, I felt frustrated yesterday when I was trying to understand an English movie, but the accent was very difficult. Now, frustrated isn't just a word on your vocabulary list. It's connected to a real emotion you felt. It's connected to a real situation you experienced. That's going to stick in your memory so much better than any textbook definition ever could. You can also use what's called the autobiography technique. This is where you create a short personal story using your new vocabulary. And here's the key: the story should be about something that actually happened to you or could realistically happen to you, not some fictional fantasy scenario. Let's say you're learning 3 words: jealous, confident, and grateful. Here's how you might create an autobiographical story using all 3. Last week, I was jealous of my friend because she got a promotion at work, but then I realized I should be grateful for what I have and confident in my own abilities. Instead of comparing myself to her, I decided to focus on improving my own skills. Now I'm confident that I can reach my goals too. See how natural that feels? You're not forcing these words into strange sentences. You're using them in a context that's completely relevant to your life. You're creating a story that could actually happen to you, and because it's personal and realistic, your brain is going to remember it. One of the biggest mistakes that English learners make is learning words in isolation. They learn the word, they learn the definition, and then they move on to the next word. But words are always better understood and remembered when they appear in context. Context is everything in language. The meaning of a word can change depending on how it's used. The tone might change, the relevance might be different. When you learn words in isolation, you're missing out on all of that contextual information. Here's a simple example: the word run. What does run mean? Well, it could mean to move quickly on foot. I run every morning for exercise. It could mean to operate or manage. She runs a successful business. It could mean a series of successes. The team is on a winning run. It could mean torn fabric in stockings. I got a run in my tights. Same word, completely different meanings depending on the context. Now, which meaning are you going to remember? Probably all of them if you learn them in context with multiple examples. But if you just memorized run equals move quickly, you'd miss out on all the other meanings and uses. This is why learning vocabulary through reading is so effective. When you read a story or an article, you encounter words in context. Your brain can understand not just what the word means, but how it's used. When you encounter a new word while reading and you can figure out what it means based on the surrounding words, that context helps cement the meaning in your memory. But let's say you want to be more intentional about using context as a learning tool. Here's how you can do it. Take a new word you want to learn and write it down. Then write 5 to 10 different sentences using that word, each in a slightly different context. Let's use the word resilient as an example. Resilient means able to recover quickly from difficulties or able to bounce back. Here are some different contexts where you might use it. The tree is resilient. Even after the storm broke many of its branches, it survived and continued to grow. That's resilience in nature. Here's another. She is a resilient person. No matter how many times she fails, she gets back up and tries again. That's resilience as a personality trait. Here's another. This material is resilient. You can bend it and twist it, but it always returns to its original shape. That's resilience as a physical property. By seeing resilient used in these different contexts, your brain understands not just the definition, but the flexibility of the word. You understand how it can be applied in different situations. And that deeper understanding is going to make the word stick in your memory much better than a single definition ever could. Here's another technique that combines context with personalization. Create short mini stories that use multiple new vocabulary words together. Let me give you an example. Let's say you're learning 5 words: meander, coastal, serene, anticipate, and rejuvenate. You could create a short story like this. Last summer, I took a vacation to a coastal town. I decided to meander through the old streets, enjoying the serene atmosphere and the ocean breeze. I was looking forward to the trip all year, and I anticipated that it would be exactly what I needed to rejuvenate my mind and body. When I finally arrived, it was even better than I imagined. Notice how all 5 words fit naturally into the story. They're not forced or awkward. They're used in a way that shows their meaning clearly. And because they're all part of one coherent narrative, your brain treats them as a connected set of information rather than 5 separate random words. The beauty of this method is that you can create as many stories as you want, and each story can teach you new vocabulary while reinforcing words you've already learned. Over time, you build up a collection of personal stories filled with meaningful English vocabulary. I want to talk about something that most vocabulary learning methods completely ignore, and that's sensory engagement. Most people approach vocabulary learning as purely a mental exercise. They read the word, they read the definition, maybe they write it down, and that's it. But what if you engaged all your senses? Here's the thing: your brain doesn't exist in isolation, it's connected to your entire body, and all of your senses feed information to your brain. When you engage multiple senses in the learning process, you create multiple neural pathways, and multiple pathways mean stronger memory. Let's start with the most obvious one, which is visual. I've already talked about using your imagination to create vivid mental images, but there's more you can do. You can use color, you can use size, you can use movement. For example, if you're learning the word vibrant, you could imagine a bright neon pink color that's almost pulsing with energy. You could imagine it moving or changing. You could imagine it being so bright that it's almost overwhelming. By engaging your visual sense in this way, you're creating a much stronger memory than you would just by reading the definition. You can also use your sense of sound. When you learn a word, say it out loud. Don't just say it once, say it multiple times. Listen to how it sounds. How does your mouth feel when you say it? Does it feel sharp or smooth? Does it require you to move your lips a lot? Is the stress on the first syllable or the second? By engaging your auditory sense and your kinesthetic sense, the sense of how your mouth and tongue move, you're creating more neural pathways. Let's take the word buzz as an example. Say it out loud. Buzz. Feel how your lips come together. Feel how your tongue vibrates. That physical sensation combined with the sound you're making is going to help you remember the word. Now imagine a bee buzzing around a flower. You can almost hear the sound, right? Bzzz. You can visualize the movement. You can feel the slight vibration if you hum the Z sound. This is sensory engagement. This is using your whole brain and your whole body to learn vocabulary, not just your reading center. Here's another sensory technique: smell. Now, you can't always engage your sense of smell when learning vocabulary, but when you can, it's incredibly powerful. If you're learning the word fragrant, maybe you light a scented candle or hold a flower to your nose while learning the word. The smell becomes part of the memory. The word fragrant will now trigger memories of that specific smell. Similarly, if you're learning the word bitter, maybe you put something bitter in your mouth, a bit of dark chocolate or some coffee, while saying the word and creating a mental image. Again, you're creating a multi-sensory memory that's going to be incredibly difficult to forget. You can do the same with texture. If you're learning the word smooth, touch something smooth while saying the word. Feel how your fingers move across the surface. If you're learning the word rough, touch something with a rough texture. The combination of the tactile sensation and the verbal learning creates a much stronger memory. Here's a practical exercise you can do right now. Close your eyes for a moment. Think of the word rain. Now engage all your senses. Listen to the sound of rain falling. Feel the coolness of rainwater on your skin. Smell the petrichor, that fresh smell that comes when rain hits dry earth. See the drops falling and bouncing. Even taste the freshness of rainwater on your tongue. Now say the word out loud. Rain. Say it slowly. Say it with emotion. Imagine where the rain is falling. Is it on a tin roof? Is it on leaves? Is it on a car? Is it on your face? The more sensory detail you can add, the stronger the memory. This is why some of the most memorable moments in your life are often associated with sensory experiences. If you remember a beautiful sunset, you probably remember how the sky looked, how the air felt, maybe even how it smelled or what sounds you heard. That multisensory memory is what makes it stick. Now, we've talked about creating rich multisensory memories, but there's one more critical element that makes all of this work, and that's spaced repetition. This is based on something called the forgetting curve, which is a theory that explains how we forget information over time. The basic idea is this: when you learn something new, you initially have a very strong memory of it, but as time passes, that memory degrades. You start to forget. That's completely normal, but here's the key insight. If you review the information before you completely forget it, you can reset the forgetting curve. You bring the memory back to a strong state, and the next time it degrades, it does so more slowly. You have more time before you need to review again. The first scientist to really study this was a guy named Hermann Ebbinghaus, and his experiments in the late 1800s showed something really interesting. If you review information at optimal intervals, you can remember it almost indefinitely without forgetting it. But if you space your reviews poorly, either too close together or too far apart, you're wasting your time. So what are the optimal intervals? Well, it depends on how deep your initial learning was. If you had a very shallow initial learning, maybe you just read a word once, you might need to review it the very next day. But if you had a deep, rich initial learning, like if you use the imagination technique and personal connections, you might not need to review it for 2 or 3 days. The general pattern that works for most people is this: review new vocabulary after 1 day, then review it again after 3 days, then after a week, then after 2 weeks, then after a month. Each time you review, you're resetting that forgetting curve. By the time a month has passed, the memory is pretty much permanent. Now you can do this manually with a notebook and a calendar. Every morning, you can pull out your notebook and review the vocabulary from 1 day ago, 3 days ago, 1 week ago, and so on. But there are apps that do this automatically. Flashcard apps like Anki or Quizlet use spaced repetition algorithms that determine exactly when you should review each word based on your performance. Here's how you use a spaced repetition app effectively. You create a flashcard for each word. On one side, you write the word in English. On the other side, you write the definition and maybe a picture or an example sentence. Then the app shows you flashcards in random order. You try to remember what the word means before you flip the card over. If you remember it correctly, the app marks it as correct and schedules it for review later. If you get it wrong, the app marks it as incorrect and schedules it for review sooner. Over time, words you remember easily get reviewed less frequently, while words you struggle with get reviewed more frequently. This is actually a really efficient way to learn a lot of vocabulary because you're focusing most of your effort on the words you actually find difficult. But here's something important. The app is just managing the scheduling. The actual learning, the deep processing of the word, that happens when you create the flashcard and when you try to retrieve the memory. So don't just passively read flashcards. When you see a flashcard, really try to remember. Spend a moment thinking about that word. Create a mental image. Use the word in a sentence in your mind. Really engage with it. Then check your answer. This is called retrieval practice, and it's one of the most effective learning techniques that exists. Every time you try to retrieve a memory, every time you try to remember something rather than passively reviewing it, you're strengthening that memory. Speaking of retrieval practice, I want to talk about this more because it's absolutely essential to remember vocabulary effectively. Active recall is basically forcing your brain to retrieve information rather than passively reviewing it. Here's the difference. Let's say you have a list of vocabulary words with their definitions. If you read the word and the definition, that's passive learning. You're just absorbing information. But if you read the word and then try to remember the definition before looking it up, that's active recall. You're forcing your brain to work to retrieve the memory, and research has shown time and again that active recall is much more effective than passive review. When you force your brain to retrieve information, you strengthen the memory in a way that doesn't happen when you just passively read or listen. Here's a simple exercise you can do right now. I'm going to give you 5 words. Try to remember what each word means without looking anything up. Just use your intuition and what you might know. The words are serendipity, ephemeral, nostalgia, pragmatic, and ebullient. Did you try? Good. Now let me tell you the meanings. Serendipity means finding something good by chance or luck. Ephemeral means lasting for a very short time. Nostalgia is sentimental longing for the past. Pragmatic means dealing with things in a realistic way based on actual circumstances. Ebullient means cheerful and full of energy. Here's the thing. By trying to retrieve the meanings from memory before I told you, you actually learned these words better than if I had just listed them and their definitions for you to read. The effort of trying to remember is what creates the strong memory. You can practice active recall in many different ways. One way is the question-answer method. You write a question that requires you to use the word and then you answer the question. For example, if you're learning the word meticulous, which means showing great attention to detail, you might ask yourself, what is one area of your life where you try to be meticulous? Then you answer, I try to be meticulous when I'm writing because I want to avoid spelling and grammar mistakes. Another way is the fill in the blank method. You write a sentence with the word left blank and then you try to fill in the correct word from memory. For example, I need to be when I'm cooking because one mistake can ruin the whole dish. The answer would be meticulous. Another way is the explanation method. You explain what a word means out loud in your own words without looking at any definitions. This forces your brain to retrieve all the information about the word and organize it in a way that makes sense to you. You're not just retrieving a definition, you're actively processing and understanding the word. Let me give you a practical exercise. I'm going to say a word and I want you to take 30 seconds to think about it and then explain it out loud as if you were explaining it to someone who doesn't speak English. The word is generous. 30 seconds, go. What did you say? Generous is when someone is willing to give things to other people without expecting anything in return. They have a kind heart and they like to help others. That's a pretty good explanation, right? And by doing that, you've actually strengthened your memory of the word generous. Here's something else that's really important for active recall. Use the word in multiple different contexts. Don't just create one sentence using a word and then consider it learned. Create 5 or 10 different sentences using the same word in different ways. For example, with the word generous. She is a generous person. She always gives money to charity. That's one context. He made a generous offer to help us with our project. That's another context. The restaurant gave us generous portions of food. That's a third context. The teacher was generous with feedback on our essays. That's a fourth context. By using the word in different contexts, you're training your brain to understand the word more deeply. You're not just learning a narrow definition, you're learning how the word can be used in various situations. Now, I want to talk about something that can take your vocabulary from good to excellent, and that's building relationships between words. Your brain doesn't store vocabulary as isolated items, it stores it as a network of interconnected concepts. The more connections you can build, the better. There are several different types of word relationships you can build. The first is synonyms, which are words that mean similar things. For example, happy and joyful are synonyms. Small and tiny are synonyms. Big and enormous are synonyms. When you learn a new word, try to think of at least one synonym and one antonym. This forces your brain to understand not just the meaning of the word itself, but how it relates to other words. It's like you're creating a web of meaning. For example, let's say you're learning the word anxious. A synonym might be nervous or worried. An antonym might be calm or relaxed. Now your brain understands anxious not just as a definition, but as part of a spectrum from calm to very worried. It understands the relationships. Another type of relationship is categories. You can group words into categories, and this actually helps your brain store and retrieve them. Instead of learning happy, sad, angry, surprised, and excited as 5 random words, your brain can organize them as emotions. That's much easier to manage. You can go even deeper with what's called semantic mapping. This is where you take a central word and then branch out to related words and concepts. For example, the word dog might connect to words like animal, pet, loyal, bark, 4 legs, tail, fur, and so on. You're creating a visual map of all the concepts that relate to dog. You can literally draw this on paper, or you can do it mentally. The act of creating these relationships forces you to think deeply about the word and how it relates to other things you know. Here's a practical exercise. Let me give you a word, and you create a mind map of related words and concepts. The word is holiday. Take a minute and think about this. What concepts relate to holiday? Well, maybe family, travel, celebration, days off work, fun, food, gifts, decorations, traditions, relaxation, and so on. Each of those can branch out further. For example, celebration might connect to party, music, dancing, laughter. Travel might connect to airplane, hotel, suitcase, passport, and so on. By creating these mental maps, you're not just learning the word holiday. You're understanding how it connects to dozens of other concepts and words. When you later encounter any of those related words, your brain might make a connection back to holiday and vice versa. That's how a rich vocabulary network builds. Here's another technique called the family tree method. You take a root word and then you find words that come from the same family. For example, the root word might be write, then you have writing, writer, written, rewrite, handwriting, and so on. All of these words share the same root, and understanding that connection helps you remember them better. Similarly, you can use prefix and suffix relationships. If you know that the prefix yon means not, then words like unhappy, unsafe, unclear, and unnecessary become easier to understand. You don't have to memorize each one individually. You understand the pattern. If you see a new word like unimportant, you can figure out what it means based on the pattern you've learned. This is why building word relationships isn't just helpful for memory, it's also helpful for understanding words you've never seen before. It's helpful for using English in new contexts where you might encounter unfamiliar words. I want to go back to something I mentioned earlier because it's so important that it deserves its own section. That's emotional connection. Your brain prioritizes emotional information. When you feel something strongly, your brain tags it as important. So one of the most powerful ways to remember vocabulary is to attach emotions to those words. This doesn't mean you have to get upset to learn a word. Emotions can be positive, negative, surprising, funny, or just deeply interesting. The key is that the emotion is real. Here's a practical approach. Think about a time in your life when you felt a particular emotion. Then learn vocabulary related to that emotion using that personal memory. For example, let's say you want to learn words related to fear. Think about a time when you felt genuinely afraid. Maybe it was when you saw a spider in your room, or when you were giving a presentation in front of a big crowd, or when you almost got hit by a car. Close your eyes and really remember that moment. Remember how your heart was racing. Remember the tightness in your chest. Remember that feeling of wanting to escape or hide. Now create sentences using fear-related vocabulary within that context. I was terrified when I saw the spider. My heart was pounding. I felt panic. I was trembling. Each of these words now carries the emotional weight of that real memory. You're not just memorizing definitions, you're building a rich emotional personal connection to these words. This is why personal stories are so powerful for vocabulary learning. When you create a story about something that happened to you or could realistically happen to you, and when you use new vocabulary in that story, the emotional reality of the story attaches itself to the words. Here's another example. Let's say you want to learn words related to success. Think about a goal you achieved that you're proud of. Maybe you finally finished that project you'd been working on, or you got a good score on a test, or you learned to do something you'd been trying to learn for a long time. Close your eyes and remember that moment. Remember how good it felt. Remember the pride. Remember the relief. Remember the happiness. Now create a story using success-related vocabulary. I worked hard for weeks to achieve my goal. I felt determined and focused. Finally, I succeeded. I was so happy and proud. I felt triumphant. I wanted to celebrate. Each of these words is now connected to a real emotion and a real memory. That's how you create vocabulary that sticks. Here's something else you can do. Create a vocabulary journal, not as a list of words and definitions, but as a personal narrative. Write about learning each word. Write about when you first encountered it, where you learned it, what it reminded you of, what you felt when you learned it. For example, you might write something like this. Today I learned the word serendipity. I was reading a book and came across it, and it instantly reminded me of when I met my best friend. We were at the same party, didn't know each other, and started talking completely by accident. That chance meeting was the start of a wonderful friendship. That's serendipity. What a beautiful word. I felt happy and grateful when I learned it. By writing your feelings and your personal stories into your vocabulary journal, you're creating a document that's not just a record of words you learned. It's a record of your emotional journey with the language, and that emotional connection is what makes the words unforgettable. Now, I want to talk about something that a lot of people overlook when learning vocabulary, and that's the role of speaking. Your brain loves speech. When you engage your vocal apparatus, your mouth, your tongue, your vocal cords, you're creating a different kind of memory than when you just read or listen passively. This is called the production effect. Basically, words that you say out loud are remembered better than words you just read. Your brain treats produced speech as especially important, so it stores it more robustly. So one of the simplest but most powerful things you can do for vocabulary learning is to speak new words out loud. Don't just read them in your mind. Actually, move your mouth and say them. Let your ears hear them coming from your own voice. This engages your auditory, kinesthetic, and verbal systems all at once. Here's a practical approach. When you learn a new word, say it out loud at least 5 times. The first time, just say the word and pay attention to how it sounds and how your mouth feels saying it. The second time, say the word as part of a sentence. The third time, say the word with emotion, maybe with excitement or sadness, depending on the meaning. The fourth time, say the word while doing something physical that relates to it. The fifth time, say the word and explain what it means out loud. For example, with the word energetic. First, say it normally, energetic. Second, say it in a sentence, I feel energetic this morning. Third, say it with emotion, maybe with a burst of enthusiasm, I feel so energetic. Fourth, say it while doing something physical, maybe bouncing or moving around, I'm so energetic. Fifth, explain it aloud. Energetic means having a lot of energy and being active and enthusiastic. Notice how that's not just one simple repetition. It's 5 different ways of engaging with the word, and each engagement strengthens the memory in a different way. Another technique that's incredibly effective is shadowing. Shadowing means listening to someone speak in English and immediately repeating what they say, trying to match their speed, their rhythm, and their intonation. It's like you're echoing them. The beauty of shadowing is that it forces you to pay close attention to how native speakers actually use English. It's not just the words, it's the rhythm, the stress, the intonation, the natural grouping of words. When you shadow, you're learning not just individual words, but how those words fit together naturally in speech. You can shadow anything. You can shadow English movies or shows. You can shadow podcasts or audiobooks. You can even shadow this conversation. Just pause after a sentence and repeat what you heard, trying to match my pace and my accent. When you shadow, your brain is doing a lot of work. It's processing the audio. It's retrieving vocabulary meanings from memory. It's producing speech. It's monitoring your own speech to try to match the original. That multitasking, even though it feels challenging, is actually creating really strong memories. Here's how to practice shadowing effectively. First, listen to a short section, maybe just 1 or 2 sentences of English speech. Don't try to understand every word. Just listen for the general rhythm and patterns. Then listen again, this time paying more attention to individual words. Then listen a third time and shadow, repeating as closely as possible to the original. If you find it too difficult, you can start with reading along with the transcript as you listen. That helps your brain connect the sounds to the written words. Over time, you can try to shadow without looking at the transcript. The pronunciation aspect of speaking is important too. When you learn a new word, pay attention to how it's pronounced. This is another way to engage your brain with the word. Look up the pronunciation if you're not sure. Say it out loud. Feel how your mouth moves. When you can pronounce a word correctly, you remember it better. And when you can use the word in speaking, you remember it even better. So don't just learn how to read English vocabulary, learn how to speak it, learn the pronunciation, learn the stress and intonation. That's how you build vocabulary that you can actually use in real conversations. Now let's talk about writing as a vocabulary learning tool. Writing is one of the most powerful ways to solidify vocabulary in memory. When you write words, you're engaging different neural pathways than when you just read or speak. The act of writing requires you to physically produce the letters. That motor activity is registered in your brain and contributes to memory formation. More importantly, writing requires conscious decision making. You have to decide which words to use, how to structure your sentences, how to express your ideas clearly. That conscious processing is what creates strong memory. Here's a simple writing practice you can do every day. Write a short journal entry in English using at least 5 new vocabulary words you've been learning. The entry doesn't have to be perfect, it doesn't have to be long, just a few sentences about your day, your thoughts, or something you're interested in. For example, you might write something like this: Today was an interesting day. I felt quite motivated to work on my English. I encountered a challenging vocabulary word that I had to look up. When I finally understood it, I felt elated. This experience reminded me that persistence is important in learning. In just a few sentences, you've used 5 interesting words: interesting, motivated, encountered, challenging, elated, and you've connected them to your real experience. When you reread this entry a week from now, you'll remember not just the words, but the context and the feelings you had when you wrote them. Another writing technique is to create flashcard sentences. Instead of writing just a word and its definition, write full sentences that demonstrate the word's usage. Better yet, write sentences from your own life. For example, instead of just writing grateful, thankful, you write, I am grateful for my family who supports my English learning journey. Now the word is attached to a meaningful sentence and a meaningful context. You can collect these sentences in a document or a notebook. Whenever you have free time, you can reread them. You're not just rereading the words, you're rereading sentences that are personally meaningful to you. That's a much more effective way to keep vocabulary fresh in your mind. Here's another powerful daily habit. Every morning or every evening, spend 5 minutes thinking about one specific vocabulary word. Really explore it deeply. Think about its meaning. Think about different contexts where you might use it. Create 3 different sentences using the word. Imagine scenarios where you'd need to use it. If you do this for just 5 words a day, you'll have learned and deeply processed 150 words in a month. And because you're spending time thinking about each word deeply rather than just doing surface level repetition, these words are going to stick in your long-term memory. Another daily habit is the personal narrative method. At the end of each day, write a few sentences about something that happened to you. The trick is to intentionally use English vocabulary related to emotions, actions, and descriptions. For example, you might write, Today I had a rather stressful morning because I was late for work. I felt anxious and rushed. However, my colleague was very supportive and helped me calm down. By the afternoon, I felt more composed and productive. I'm grateful for having such a considerate colleague. In this short passage, you've used stressful, anxious, rushed, supportive, composed, productive, and grateful. These words are now attached to a real experience from your day. Every time you think about this day, you'll think of these words and what they mean. Writing serves another important purpose too. It gives you a permanent record of your vocabulary learning. You can look back at entries from weeks or months ago and see how much you've grown. You can reread old entries and notice that you're using more sophisticated vocabulary now. That's incredibly motivating. Let me talk about another technique that works especially well for visual learners, and that's creating visual organization systems for your vocabulary. Your brain is fundamentally visual. Even if you don't consider yourself a visual learner, engaging your visual system when learning makes a big difference. One simple way to do this is to create category charts or tables. Organize your vocabulary by topic or theme and present it visually. For example, you might create a table about kitchen vocabulary. You have items, actions, and descriptions. Under items, you have table, chair, oven, knife, spoon, plate, cup, and so on. Under actions, you have cook, chop, stir, mix, bake, boil, and so on. Under descriptions, you have hot, cold, sharp, heavy, light, delicious, and so on. When you see all this vocabulary organized together, your brain can see patterns and relationships. Another technique is mind mapping, which I mentioned earlier, but it's worth going into more detail. A mind map is a visual diagram where you start with a central concept and then branch out with related concepts and ideas. To create a mind map, start with a central word or concept and write it in the middle of a page or a screen. Then draw branches coming off that central word and write related words or concepts at the end of each branch. Then you can keep branching out from those words with even more related ideas. For example, if your central word is travel, your first branches might be preparation, transportation, accommodation, activities, and emotions. Then under preparation, you might have branches for documents, packing, planning, and budgeting. Under transportation, you might have branches for airplane, train, car, and boat, and so on. The visual nature of mind mapping helps your brain see how all these concepts are interconnected. It's not just a linear list of words, it's a visual representation of a whole web of knowledge about a topic. You can create color-coded systems too. For example, you might assign different colors to different parts of speech. All nouns are blue, all verbs are red, all adjectives are green, and so on. When you review your vocabulary list and you see all the blue words grouped together, your brain reinforces the concept that these are all nouns. Same with the red verbs and the green adjectives. Some people even create visual images to represent words. Instead of just writing the word and its definition, they draw or find a picture of what the word represents. Words with visual representations are much easier to remember than words with just text definitions. You can do this literally by hand, drawing pictures next to words, or you can collect images from the internet and organize them on a document or on a board. The point is to engage your visual brain in the vocabulary learning process. Another technique is color-coded flashcards. Instead of writing all your flashcards the same way, use different colors for different types of words or different difficulty levels. Easier words on white cards, medium difficulty on yellow cards, harder words on pink cards. When you're reviewing, you can focus on different difficulty levels at different times. The visual organization doesn't have to be complicated or time-consuming. It just needs to help your brain see patterns and connections. The simpler the better, actually, because simple visual systems are easier to maintain over time. One of the most underrated techniques for learning and remembering vocabulary is teaching. When you teach something to someone else, your brain has to organize that information in a coherent way. You can't just vaguely know something if you're going to teach it. You have to really understand it. Teaching forces you to retrieve information from memory, organize it, and present it in a way that makes sense to someone else. That's incredibly powerful for learning. Here's how you can practice this. Find someone, a friend, a family member, a language partner, and teach them about new vocabulary you've learned. It doesn't have to be a formal lesson, it can be casual. You might just start a conversation and naturally bring in the new words you've been learning. For example, you might say, "Hey, I learned a new word today. It's ubiquitous." That means something is everywhere, very common, like smartphones are ubiquitous. You see them everywhere. What do you think is ubiquitous in your life? By explaining the word and then asking your conversation partner about it, you're reinforcing the meaning in your own mind. And you're also practicing speaking, which is valuable for multiple reasons. If you don't have someone to teach, you can teach yourself. Stand in front of a mirror and explain a word as if you're teaching it to a class. Explain the meaning, give examples, ask yourself questions, and answer them. This might feel silly, but it's actually very effective. Your brain doesn't know the difference between teaching a real person and teaching your reflection in the mirror. Conversation practice in general is incredibly valuable for vocabulary. When you're having a real conversation, you're forced to use vocabulary in real time. You can't take time to think about the perfect word. You have to produce speech on the fly. That's how vocabulary becomes automatic and usable. Try to practice conversation with anyone you can, a language partner, a tutor, a native speaker, even yourself in the mirror. Talk about topics you're interested in. Use your new vocabulary as naturally as possible. Don't worry about making mistakes. Mistakes are actually incredibly valuable for learning because they show you where your knowledge is incomplete. Here's something powerful that happens when you have conversations. You'll use a word, and if you use it incorrectly, someone might correct you. Or you might realize as you're saying it that you're not totally sure about the usage. That moment of uncertainty and correction is exactly when strong learning happens. Your brain is suddenly very alert, very focused on that word and how it should be used. Another technique is to find or create conversation scenarios. Imagine that you're in a specific situation and you need to use certain vocabulary. Maybe you're at a restaurant, maybe you're at a doctor's office, maybe you're meeting someone new. Imagine what someone might ask you and how you would respond using your new vocabulary. Then actually practice having that conversation. Speak out loud, answer the questions you're imagining. Use the vocabulary naturally in a realistic context. The more you practice using vocabulary in conversation, the more automatic and natural it becomes. It moves from being something you consciously think about to being something you can access instantly without thinking. Now, let me talk about technology and apps. Technology can be an incredibly useful tool for vocabulary learning, but it can also be a distraction if you're not careful about how you use it. Flashcard apps like Anki and Quizlet have spaced repetition built in, which, as we discussed, is one of the most effective learning methods. These apps can manage the scheduling for you so you don't have to remember when to review each word. The apps will tell you which words to review and when. The way to use these apps effectively is to create the flashcards yourself or review existing ones carefully. The act of creating or reviewing the flashcard is part of the learning. It's not passive, you're actively engaging with the material. Also, when you're using flashcard apps, take the time to create good flashcards. Instead of just writing the word and a one-word definition, write a full sentence, include an image if possible, and maybe include information about word family or related words. Another type of app is dictionary apps. Using a dictionary is incredibly valuable. When you encounter a new word, looking it up in a good dictionary gives you not just the meaning, but often example sentences, pronunciation, related words, and etymological information. A good dictionary can teach you so much more than just a definition. Language learning apps like Duolingo, Bubble, and Rosetta Stone have vocabulary components. These can be useful, but remember that they're usually focused on breadth rather than depth. They try to teach you many words, but often in a relatively shallow way. They're good as supplementary tools, but they shouldn't be your only method of learning. YouTube and podcast apps are great for finding native speakers talking about topics you're interested in. Listening to native speakers naturally using vocabulary is incredibly valuable. You get to hear authentic pronunciation, natural usage, and how words sound in real conversations. Translation apps can be useful for looking up individual words or phrases, but be careful not to rely on them too heavily. Sometimes translations miss nuance, sometimes they're just wrong. Use them as a check, not as your primary learning method. Anki is particularly worth mentioning because it's specifically designed around spaced repetition. You can create your own decks or download decks that other people have created. The app will manage the scheduling automatically so that words you find difficult are reviewed more frequently and words you know well are reviewed less frequently. Here's how to use Anki effectively. Create or find a good deck for vocabulary you want to learn. Every day, spend time on the app reviewing flashcards. Try hard to remember before you flip the card. If you get it right, mark it correct. If you're not sure or you get it wrong, mark it incorrect. The app will automatically schedule harder words for more frequent review. Over time, you'll build up a large collection of vocabulary you've learned and reviewed using spaced repetition. The app makes it easy to maintain. But remember, apps are just tools. The real learning happens in your mind. Apps can help organize and manage that learning, but they can't create deep understanding for you. That's something you have to do through active engagement with the vocabulary. Let's talk about immersion. One of the most powerful ways to learn vocabulary is to immerse yourself in the language. Immersion means surrounding yourself with English in your daily life so that you're constantly encountering it. Now, you don't have to move to an English speaking country to create immersion. You can create immersion where you are. It takes intentional effort, but it's definitely possible. Start with your phone. Change your phone's language settings to English. Your notifications, your menu options, everything will now be in English. Initially, this might be frustrating because you're less familiar with the interface, but that challenge is actually good for learning. You're forced to figure things out, and in doing so, you encounter lots of English vocabulary. Similarly, change the language settings on your computer to English. You'll see English everywhere as you use your computer. You might not consciously study these words, but your brain is constantly absorbing them. Follow English language social media accounts. Follow accounts that post interesting content, inspiring quotes, funny jokes, content that you actually want to read. As you scroll through your feed, you'll encounter lots of English vocabulary. Because you're reading about topics you're interested in, the vocabulary feels relevant and interesting. Change your entertainment to English. Watch English movies or shows. Listen to English music and podcasts. Read books or blogs in English. Choose content that you actually enjoy. The more you enjoy it, the more you'll engage with it and the more vocabulary you'll absorb. Here's something really powerful. Choose one activity you do daily, maybe making breakfast or taking a shower or your commute, and dedicate that time to English vocabulary. While you're making breakfast, describe what you're doing out loud in English. While you're in the shower, practice speaking English conversations. During your commute, listen to an English podcast or audiobook. By incorporating English into your daily routines, you're not adding extra time to your day. You're using time you're already spending and making it productive. And because you're doing it regularly, it becomes a habit. The habit makes it stick. Here's another idea. Join English language communities. There are online forums, social media groups, and Discord servers where English learners gather to practice together. You can write posts, read what other people have written, and engage in conversations. You get to practice writing and reading, and you get feedback on your language. You can also find language exchange partners. There are websites and apps that match people who want to practice languages together. You can have conversations with native English speakers who are learning your language. You help them, they help you. Everyone benefits. The key to successful immersion is consistency and choosing content you actually care about. If you force yourself to watch English movies you hate or read books you find boring, you won't stick with it. But if you choose content you enjoy and commit to regular exposure, you'll absorb vocabulary naturally. Real-world usage is the ultimate goal. At some point, You want to use the vocabulary you've learned in real situations with real people. This might be in writing, emails, social media posts, essays. It might be in speaking, conversations, presentations, phone calls. The more you use vocabulary in real situations, the more ingrained it becomes. Now, let me talk about something that every language learner faces at some point, and that's hitting a plateau. You start learning, you make great progress, and then suddenly it feels like you're not making progress anymore. You're learning new vocabulary, but it's harder. The gains are smaller. It's easy to get discouraged and give up. Plateaus are completely normal. They're not a sign that you're bad at languages. They're a sign that you've reached a new level of difficulty. You've mastered the basics, and now you're moving into more advanced territory where progress is naturally slower. Here's how to overcome a plateau. First, acknowledge that plateaus are temporary. You will break through. It just takes time and persistence. Second, vary your learning methods. If you've been learning by reading, try listening more. If you've been using flashcards, try immersion and real conversation. Change things up so your brain doesn't get bored and your learning stays fresh. Third, set specific goals. Instead of just having a vague goal to get better at English, set a specific goal like learning 5 new words a day or having a 5-minute conversation in English once a week. Specific, measurable goals give you something concrete to work toward and help you track progress. Fourth, find your why. Why are you learning English? Is it for your career, for travel, for personal growth, for connecting with others? Really think about your motivation and remind yourself of it regularly. When you're struggling through a plateau, remembering your deeper motivation can help you push through. Fifth, celebrate small wins. You might not feel like you're making big progress, but you are. You're learning new words. You're having better conversations. You're understanding more when you watch movies. These are victories, even if they're small ones. Celebrate them. Sixth, find community. Learning alongside other people is incredibly motivating. Find study partners, join online communities, or take classes. Knowing that other people are on the same journey as you is encouraging. Seventh, be patient with yourself. Language learning is a long-term process. You're not going to become fluent overnight. But if you stick with it, if you're consistent, you will eventually reach your goals. Trust the process. Here's something else that helps maintain motivation. Create a record of your progress. Keep a learning journal where you note which words you've learned, how many words you can now use confidently, improvement in your speaking or writing. Look back at your journal periodically. Seeing how far you've come is incredibly motivating. You can also set mini milestones. Instead of just having one big goal, have smaller goals along the way. Learn 500 words, then 1,000, then 1,500. Have a simple conversation, then a more complex conversation, then a debate. These mini milestones give you progress to celebrate regularly. Once you've mastered the basic techniques, there are some more advanced strategies you can use to really take your vocabulary to the next level. One advanced technique is studying etymology and word origins. Understanding where words come from helps you remember them and understand related words. Many English words come from Latin, Greek, French, and other languages. If you understand the roots, you can often figure out the meanings of related words. For example, the word telephone comes from Greek, tele meaning far and phone meaning sound. Once you know this, you understand that teleconference, telescope, and other tele words are all about distance, and that telephone, microphone, and other phone words are all about sound. By studying etymology, you're building knowledge that helps you understand not just individual words, but families of words and how language is structured. Another advanced technique is using corpora. A corpus is a large collection of real-world text or speech. There are online corpora like Google Ngrams, Corpus of Contemporary American English, and others that let you search for how words are actually used in real context. You can see example sentences, see how frequently words appear, see what words commonly appear together. This is useful when you want to really understand subtle differences between similar words, or when you want to understand how native speakers actually use language in practice. Another technique is reading literature and challenging texts. Once you've built a solid foundation of vocabulary, reading literature, novels, poems, essays exposes you to vocabulary used in sophisticated ways. Literature uses language beautifully and creatively. It teaches you not just what words mean, but how they can be used. Similarly, listening to podcasts and lectures on topics you're interested in exposes you to sophisticated vocabulary in context. If you're interested in science, listen to science podcasts. If you're interested in philosophy, listen to philosophy lectures. You'll learn vocabulary related to your interests, and because you're interested in the content, the vocabulary feels relevant and engaging. Another advanced technique is practicing nuance and register. Different words are appropriate in different contexts. Some words are formal, some are casual, some are technical, some are poetic. Once you've learned the basic meaning of words, understanding their register and when to use them is an advanced skill that native speakers have. Pay attention to this as you consume English content. Notice how language changes depending on context. Notice how people speak differently to their boss than to their friends, how formal writing differs from casual writing. This awareness of register helps you use vocabulary appropriately in different situations. Another technique is creating your own language rules and patterns. As you've learned more vocabulary, you've noticed patterns in how English works. Create your own rules or mnemonics to remember tricky words or patterns. For example, if you keep forgetting certain irregular verbs, create a story or a song that helps you remember them. The more personal and unique your learning aids, the better they work for you. Now let me pull everything together and give you a comprehensive daily routine that combines all these techniques into a practical system you can actually implement. When you wake up, spend 5 minutes reviewing vocabulary from the past few days using a flashcard app or your notebook. Just review, not learning new words. This resets the forgetting curve for words you've already learned. You're maintaining them. Then, during your morning, find an opportunity to use English. Maybe you change your news sources to English and read some headlines while eating breakfast, or you listen to an English podcast, or you watch an English video. The point is to start your day with some exposure to English vocabulary in context. During your workday or your busy day, find moments to incorporate English. Change notifications on your phone to English so you encounter vocabulary throughout the day. If someone sends you a message, respond in English if possible. These small moments of English throughout your day add up. At lunch or during a break, spend 10 to 15 minutes learning new vocabulary. Choose 5 new words you want to learn today. Look them up in a good dictionary. Read the definition. Read example sentences. Think about how you might use them. Create mental images. This active engagement is where deep learning happens. Later in the afternoon or evening, find time to practice speaking. This might be shadowing an English video, having a conversation with a language partner, or just speaking to yourself out loud. The goal is to produce English speech, to practice using the vocabulary you're learning. Before dinner, write a short journal entry or a few sentences in English using the new words you learned today and any other vocabulary you want to practice. This gives you practice with written production. In the evening, before bed, spend a few minutes reviewing the new words you learned today. Create one more mental image for each word, say each word out loud, and create one more sentence using it. This pre-sleep review takes advantage of memory consolidation during sleep. This comprehensive routine hits all the different types of learning. You get review, you get new learning, you get listening, you get speaking, you get writing, you get visual engagement, you get emotional engagement through personal narratives. It's balanced and comprehensive. Now, you don't have to spend hours doing all of this. The total time is maybe 30 to 45 minutes a day if you're concentrated and focused, and much of it happens passively, the exposure throughout your day while you're doing other things. The key is consistency. It's better to do a little bit every single day than to do a lot once a week. Spaced repetition is built into this routine. Regular practice is built in. You're not going to reach your goals by studying intensively for a few days and then taking a break. You're going to reach your goals by being consistent. Let me address some specific challenges that English learners commonly face and offer advice on dealing with them. Challenge number 1, remembering words that are similar. English has many word pairs that are similar but have different meanings, like does the word affect mean to influence, or effect mean to bring about, or is it the other way around? These similar words are confusing. Here's how to handle it. Create specific mnemonics or memory aids for these challenging word pairs. For example, you might remember that affect with an A means action, while effect with an E means end result. Create a sentence that ties them together. The weather affects my mood. The medication had a positive effect. By explicitly comparing and contrasting these words, you'll remember them better. Challenge number 2, remembering words from specialized fields or technical vocabulary. If you're learning English for business or medicine or law, you might need to learn specialized vocabulary that doesn't come up in everyday conversation. Here's how to handle it. Immerse yourself in that specific field. Read articles and documents from that field. Listen to podcasts and videos about that field. The more you expose yourself to the specialized vocabulary in context, the more natural it becomes. Also, study etymologies and roots specific to that field. Medical terminology, for example, has consistent patterns that make memorization easier once you know the roots. Challenge number 3, retaining vocabulary when you're not using it regularly. Maybe you learn vocabulary for a specific situation, like travel vocabulary for a trip, and then you don't use it for months. How do you keep it from fading? Here's how to handle it. Use spaced repetition even for vocabulary you're not immediately using. Schedule regular review sessions. Also, try to make it a habit to think about these words occasionally. If you learn travel vocabulary every once in a while, imagine a travel scenario and mentally go through the vocabulary. That mental review helps keep it in memory. Challenge number 4, moving from passive to active vocabulary. You might understand a word when you read it or hear it, but you can't use it in your own speaking or writing. That's passive vocabulary. You know it, but you can't produce it. Here's how to handle it. The key is production. Force yourself to use the word, write sentences using it, speak it out loud, use it in conversations, explain it to others. The more you produce vocabulary, the faster it moves from passive to active. Set a goal to use each new word at least once in speech and once in writing within a week of learning it. Challenge number 5, choosing which words to learn. There are hundreds of thousands of English words. You can't learn them all. Which should you prioritize? Here's how to handle it. Focus on high-frequency words first. The most common 500 to 1,000 English words will give you the ability to understand roughly 80% of what you encounter. Learn those first. After that, learn vocabulary relevant to your interests and your goals. If you're interested in cooking, learn cooking vocabulary. If you're interested in technology, learn tech vocabulary. There's also the 80-20 principle. Learn the 20% of vocabulary that covers 80% of communication. Prioritize the most useful words. Focus on common words that come up regularly in your life. Challenge number 6. Maintaining motivation over the long term. Language learning is a long-term commitment. How do you stay motivated when progress is slow? We talked about this earlier, but it's worth emphasizing again. Find your deep why, create community, set specific goals, celebrate small wins, track your progress, vary your methods to keep things interesting, and remember that slow progress is still progress. If you're consistently learning, even slowly, you're moving toward your goal. Let me dive a little deeper into the neuroscience of why the techniques we've discussed actually work. Understanding the science helps you understand why you're doing these practices and can motivate you to stick with them. When you learn a new word, you're actually creating new neural connections in your brain. Neurons that fire together wire together. This is called Hebbian learning, named after neuroscientist Donald Hebb. When you learn a word, you're activating multiple neurons at the same time. Neurons related to the sound of the word, neurons related to its meaning, neurons related to situations where you might use it, neurons related to emotions you feel about it. These neurons fire together, and over time, the connections between them strengthen. The more often these neurons fire together, the stronger the connections become. That's how memory works at a neurological level. Now, here's where the techniques come in. Vivid imagery activates visual neurons. Speaking a word activates motor neurons and auditory neurons. Creating emotional connections activates emotional processing areas of your brain. Personal stories activate narrative processing areas. By engaging multiple brain systems, you're creating multiple neural pathways that all connect to that word. The more pathways, the stronger and more accessible the memory. Spaced repetition works because of a phenomenon called long-term potentiation. When you review information at spaced intervals, the synaptic connections don't just strengthen, they become more stable and more resistant to decay. Each review is setting in stone the neural pathways associated with that word. Sleep also plays a crucial role. During sleep, your brain consolidates memories. Neural connections are reinforced. Information moves from short-term to long-term memory storage. This is why sleeping after learning something new is so important. This is why reviewing before bed helps with memory. You're giving your brain the opportunity to consolidate the learning during sleep. Emotions strengthen memory through the amygdala, an almond-shaped structure in your brain that processes emotions. When something is emotionally significant, the amygdala flags it as important. This causes the hippocampus, which is crucial for memory formation, to consolidate that memory more thoroughly. This is why words you learn with emotional engagement are remembered better. The prefrontal cortex is involved in deliberate, conscious learning. When you actively engage with a word, when you think about its meaning, create a sentence, imagine a scenario, you're using your prefrontal cortex. This conscious, deliberate processing creates stronger memories than passive exposure. Understanding this neuroscience helps explain why passive methods like just reading a word list doesn't work very well. You're not activating enough of your brain. But when you combine visual, auditory, motor, emotional, and narrative processes, you're activating many different brain systems, creating many different neural pathways, all pointing to the same word. That's how you create unforgettable vocabulary. Let me talk about something that can dramatically increase the efficiency of your vocabulary learning, and that's understanding language patterns and vocabulary families. English, like all languages, has patterns. Words are built in systematic ways. Understanding these patterns means you don't have to memorize every word individually. Once you understand the pattern, you can understand and generate many new words. One pattern is prefixes. English uses many prefixes, little pieces of meaning added to the beginning of words. The prefix un means not, so unhappy means not happy, unsafe means not safe, unclear means not clear. Once you know that un means not, you can understand hundreds of words that start with un. Similarly, re means again, redo means do again, rewrite means write again, rebuild means build again. The suffix tion is added to verbs to create nouns. Create becomes creation, collect becomes collection, educate becomes education. There are many of these patterns, and learning them is incredibly efficient for vocabulary learning. Instead of learning 3,000 words individually, you learn maybe 100 base words and 100 prefixes and suffixes, and now you can understand hundreds of thousands of words. Another pattern is word families. Words that share the same root often have related meanings. Happy, happiness, happily, unhappy, and unhappy, sad, and sadness. The word happy is the root. All of these other words are variations on that root. They have related meanings. When you learn a new word, also learn its related word forms. If you learn the verb write, also learn writer, writing, written, rewrite, and so on. This helps you understand not just the base word, but its variations. Another pattern is semantic relationships. Words in the same semantic field, the same topic area, are related. If you're learning food vocabulary, you might learn apple, banana, orange, and carrot. But you'd also learn cook, eat, meal, hungry, delicious, and so on. These all relate to food. By learning vocabulary in semantic fields rather than randomly, your brain can organize the information better. It sees the connections. It understands how the words relate to each other. Another pattern is collocation. This is when certain words commonly appear together. In English, we say make a decision, make a mistake, make an effort. We don't usually say do a decision or create a decision. The verb make collocates with decision. Learning collocations helps you use words naturally. Native speakers recognize these patterns naturally. When you learn collocations, you're learning how native speakers actually combine words. When you're learning new vocabulary, pay attention to these patterns. Notice prefixes and suffixes. Notice word families. Notice semantic relationships. Notice collocations. This pattern recognition will help you learn more vocabulary more efficiently. Let me address something that can be really discouraging for English learners, and that's the experience of forgetting words you thought you had learned. You spend time learning a word. You feel confident, you think you know it, then a few weeks or months later, you encounter it again, and you completely forget. You're back to square one. It's frustrating, but here's what's important to understand. This is completely normal. Forgetting is not a failure. Forgetting is part of the learning process. The scientist Hermann Ebbinghaus, who we talked about earlier, found that we all forget things over time. That's how human memory works. But he also found that we can create permanent memories through the right kind of repetition. When you forget a word, it's actually not a complete loss. The memory is still there, but it's weakened. When you review that word again, your brain reactivates the memory and it becomes strong again. And importantly, the second time you learn it faster than the first time. This is called relearning. Because of relearning, going back to a word you forgot isn't starting from scratch. It's actually faster than the first time. So don't feel bad when you forget. It's part of the process. Here's how to handle forgetting. Use spaced repetition systems like Anki, which automatically identify words you've forgotten and schedule them for more frequent review. Don't judge yourself for forgetting, just accept it and review the word again. Also, think about why you might have forgotten. Did you not engage deeply enough with the word the first time? Did you not review it enough? Did you learn it in a purely passive way without creating active engagement? Use this as information to adjust your approach. For example, if you used only flashcards to learn a word and you forgot it, maybe next time you'll also speak it out loud and create a sentence using it. Different words might require different learning strategies. Pay attention to what works for you. Another way to handle forgetting is to embrace it as an opportunity for deeper learning. When you forget a word and then relearn it, you're creating multiple exposures to that word. Multiple exposures create stronger learning. So in a way, forgetting and relearning is more beneficial than not forgetting in the first place. Everything we've talked about, all of these techniques and strategies, they're tools. Tools are useful, but they're not a substitute for having your own personal system. I recommend you create your own vocabulary learning system tailored to your life, your learning style, and your goals. Here's how to do that. First, assess yourself. Are you a visual learner? Do you learn better through reading or through listening? Do you prefer structure or do you prefer flexibility? Do you have lots of time or only a little bit of time each day? Understanding yourself helps you choose techniques that will work for you. Second, set your goals. How many new words do you want to learn? By when do you want to learn them? What topics are most important to you? Third, choose your core techniques. Based on everything we've discussed, which techniques resonate with you most? Maybe you like flashcards and spaced repetition. Maybe you prefer immersion and conversation. Maybe you like writing and journaling. Choose 3 to 5 core techniques that you'll commit to. Fourth, choose your tools. Will you use apps or notebooks or a combination? Will you use a flashcard app or create your own system? What resources will help you stay organized? Fifth, create your daily and weekly routine. How much time can you dedicate to vocabulary learning? What time of day works best for you? Create a routine that's realistic for your life. It's better to do a little consistently than to burn out trying to do too much. Sixth, create accountability. How will you track your progress? Will you keep a journal? Will you use an app that tracks your learning? Will you tell someone else about your goals so they can help hold you accountable? Accountability helps you stay consistent. Seventh, build in variety. Don't do the exact same thing every single day. Vary your techniques, your topics, your methods. This keeps learning fresh and engages different parts of your brain. Eighth, be willing to adjust. As you implement your system, you'll discover what works and what doesn't. Be willing to adjust. Maybe a certain app doesn't work for you. Maybe you have less time than you thought. Maybe you realize you prefer certain types of vocabulary. Use this information to refine your system. A personal system is something you create and refine over time. It's not something you get perfect on the first try. But having a system, having a structured approach, is much more effective than random, scattered learning. As we wrap up this conversation, I want to emphasize something really important. Learning vocabulary is a marathon, not a sprint. It's not about how fast you can learn. It's about consistency and long-term commitment. If you're consistent, if you show up every day and do the work, you will reach your goals. You might not see dramatic progress every week, but if you look back every few months, you'll be amazed at how much you've learned. I also want to emphasize that there's no one right way to learn vocabulary. Different people learn in different ways. What works for one person might not work for another. That's okay. The techniques we've discussed are tools. You get to choose which ones work for you. Don't feel pressured to use every technique. Don't feel like you're doing it wrong if you're not following someone else's method. Find what works for you. Be experimental. Try different things. Notice what you enjoy and what gives you results. Remember that learning vocabulary is not separate from using vocabulary. The best way to learn words is in real contexts, in real conversations, in real life situations. The classroom and the flashcard app are tools to support that real world learning, but they're not the goal. The goal is to use English confidently and authentically. Also, remember to celebrate your progress. Every new word you learn is a victory. Every conversation you have in English is a victory. Every time you understand something you didn't understand before, that's a victory. Notice these moments. Feel proud of them. They add up. Finally, I want to remind you of something we talked about at the very beginning. Your brain is not broken. You're not bad at languages. You're just learning how to work with your brain instead of against it. The techniques we've discussed align with how your brain actually functions. When you use these techniques, when you combine visual, auditory, emotional, and kinesthetic learning, you're using your brain's natural strengths. You can do this. You can build an amazing, useful, confident vocabulary in English. It takes time, it takes consistency, it takes effort, but it's absolutely possible. And I promise you, the effort is worth it. A strong vocabulary opens doors. It lets you communicate clearly. It lets you understand native speakers. It lets you feel confident in English. It lets you access a whole world of English media, literature, and connection. Thank you for spending this time with me. I hope you've learned some valuable techniques and strategies. I hope you're feeling motivated to take your vocabulary to the next level. Go out there and start building that vocabulary. Be consistent, be patient, be kind to yourself, and I can't wait to hear about the progress you make. So that's our episode for today. I really appreciate you sticking with me through this entire deep dive into vocabulary learning. If you found this episode helpful, please remember to hit that subscribe button so you get notified about future episodes. And if you really enjoyed it, please share it with someone who's also learning English and could benefit from these strategies. Also, check out our podcast playlist where we have more episodes on language learning, personal development, and practical skills. You'll find a collection of discussions and lessons that can continue supporting your English learning journey. Thank you again for being here. Thank you for your commitment to learning English. And I'll talk to you in the next episode. Keep learning, keep growing, and keep speaking English with confidence. Until next time, take care.